Good morning, guys. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Republicans podcast. Today, as I promised for the Faces of Cobh, I have another interesting person, very well known, very well loved, very well respected man from Cobh, Kieran McCarty. Welcome, Kieran.
Thank
Welcome to
you.
the podcast.
Thanks for
It
the
is
invite.
lovely to have him as I promised Faces of Cobh because this city, this town has so many interesting people, so many interesting stories. And one of them is Kieran's stories that I wanted to bring up. And I want all those stories, all these names and all these people needs to be immortalized with these videos. And hopefully after many years, people, they will look at there so they can know the Kieran's history. And he has so many interesting things that he can tell us, which I wanted to hear, and I want you to hear those stories as well. Welcome, Kieran. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for joining to the podcast. It is important to have you. And would you mind to tell us who is Kieran McCarty? Where you were born and where your family is from. So we would like to know about you a bit, about your family.
Um, Very simple, very ordinary, local person. I was born in Cobh Hospital,
Okay.
like so many other people, up to the 1970s. It was a maternity unit. So most of the town prior to 1971, I believe, would have been born in Cobh. Um, I come from an ordinary working class family. My father worked in Irish Steel. He met my mother in England, by the way. He emigrated to England in the late 40s after the war as a young lad. He would have been a teenager. And he met my mother. He worked on the construction of Heathrow Airport.
Wow.
And my mother worked in, I think it was, I can't remember the name of the company, but they made records, music records. They met him and they married. And they moved back here in 1950, 51.
They moved to Cobh, yeah?
They moved back. They moved to Clontown first because
Mhm.
that's where my father hails from.
Oh, he's
And
from Clowntown. He's
yeah,
very
so
close
very
to.
rural area. They would have been in a cottage. They wouldn't have had running water or sanitary. And that would have been a big culture shock to my mother, who came from the big city, London. But she loved it. She loved Ireland, and uh, I don't ever, from childhood, I don't ever remember my mother with an English accent.
Wow.
I always remember my mother just speaking like the rest of us. It might
How
just.
did you, how did she even catch the accent in quick time?
I don't think she went out looking to create it. It would have just evolved with time, with all
Wow.
her surroundings, the people around her. It may have been there, but I just didn't detect it. I
Of
put it that
course,
way.
of
Now, my
course.
older siblings probably would have memories of my mother with a bit of a twang, but I never recall it. And my mother she just melted in and became part of. And a lot of people in Cove probably wouldn't even be aware that my mother was English, in later life. But so we had that kind of English-Irish divide because we had a family in England, we had relatives, and we'd go there and they'd come here, and we just grew up with all that.
Of course. And you didn't have any problem with obviously English people and your mother, obviously,
No, no,
and
no.
British, and there was no problem. As we say, there is no issues between the ethnicities or nations,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
How many brothers and sisters you have?
So I have three brothers and three sisters, and then we had a fourth brother who my parents adopted in 1980,
Oh,
Ross.
beautiful,
Yeah,
beautiful.
so there was.
Adopted from Ireland
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah. In the town, and Ross is part of us as well now.
and
Yeah.
where the brothers and they all live here or they are like moved to abroad?
No, they would have all, except myself and Michael, wouldn't have emigrated, but my other brothers would have. They would have spent
Mhm.
time in England and different places working. I worked in Belgium myself later on,
Oh,
but I was
Belgium.
married that stage. That was later on. Um, I had my eldest sister Eilish emigrated to New Zealand and then to Australia, and she only returned back here in the last couple of years.
Last couple of years, yeah.
Yeah, she retired with her husband,
Uh,
and but I this was never, everything was natural about this. There was nothing unusual about this
of
because
course,
immigration was a part of everyone's life. There was
unfortunately, yeah.
hardly a family in Ireland right up to the 1980s, 90s.
Mhm, mhm.
That was people who emigrated because of necessity, as
Yes.
opposed to people who choose to emigrate. and in more recent times.
Of course.
But so all of that would have been natural. But then you see, some people might blame the educational system that and Irish history, and as a child growing up with Irish history, you're not very aware. You're not aware. You're not aware of censorship. You're not aware of how there might be biases in a particular narrative being presented, and that could work both ways, by the way.
Oh yeah, of
Yeah.
course, yeah, like
And so I would have been just coming into the age, early teens when the war developed, the conflict in the north, and we would have been aware of that, and we would, and of course our parents would be, particularly my mother, being English, was very kind of protective, not to get sucked into all of that.
of course.
My father would have been a Republican, um, and he wouldn't have been, not in the sense that he would be ramming it down our throats or anything like that. He wasn't that
Just
sort of
like
a
a
person.
supporter, yeah.
Yeah, he was just a genuine person who, like everyone else, felt what was happening in the country was wrong. How you dealt with that and how you approached that was a totally different matter. But
Exactly.
but being a Republican, he would have had strong views, like myself.
Reactions.
And like I would have been open my mind as a teenager, as a young person. Your mind is open to all fresh ideas and information and all that. I did notice, and I when I was older, I look back at it and I thought about history, being taught history in school, because I remember going into the Presentation Brothers school, the boys' school, St. Joseph's. I remember going in there. I think I was 7 or 8 when we first went in there, and I might be wrong about that now, but I know I was very young. And I recall seeing these photographs on the walls of the classrooms, these big soldiers and outside the GPO and the tanks and the guns and the whole lot and the flags. And I remember looking at the flag. Each province had in the picture would have their own flag: Ulster, Connaught, Leinster, and Munster. And I remember thinking that's brilliant. I didn't realize these guys were doing the 50th commemoration of the 1916 Rising, and De Valera was taking the salute on the podium, and got me thinking. I was wondering what all this was about, and then we're kind of learning bits and pieces here in history from the brothers. But then I noticed that when the Troubles broke out, 1969, about 3 or 4 years later, totally different attitude.
Of course.
And it depended, and this was interesting because it depended on which brother, which teacher you had, because some of them were one side in the Civil War and some were on the other. And that depended on who the luck of the draw, which teacher you got, because that's going to develop your thinking.
Exactly, your
process.
way of looking into.
And then as it went on, I noticed that history finished.
Okay.
Irish history went stop. It stopped with the civil rights movement before the conflict happened. And to the best of my knowledge, it didn't resume until the Good Friday Agreement.
Wow.
Because no one was going to be taught about the conflict. Because to do that, it would be very hard to do without taking a side or being perceived as taking their side. And as we know, the culture of censorship had really dug in here in the south of Ireland.
Of course.
Section 31 of the Broadcasting Act. So, for example, a person who was a Sinn Féin councillor couldn't make a statement on the radio or in the newspapers about fixing a footpath for someone.
Wow.
Because that party was prescribed. Was it forbidden?
Unbelievable. And this is not paranoia. Many years ago, basically.
And the ironic thing about all of that, we came to see later, that ignorance that people, and it wasn't people's own fault that they were censored, that they weren't getting all the news, or they weren't being told all the facts. It was the system was preventing them from learning that. So if you don't learn the facts, then it's going to be harder to get to a situation where there can be a conclusion of all of this, where the peace process can develop. Because you're demonizing one side, and people who are as ruthless and have the big forces and all the power and all the money and all the media behind them on the other side, they're the ones, it's their narrative is going to win out. So the peace process that began in 1994, and that was the first year that I became a councillor, by the way.
All right, 1994,
yeah. So I was one of the first people who was, because I ran in the European elections as well, local elections and European all in the same day in 1980. So I was going into these radio studios and television studios for election debates. And Section 31, the Broadcasting Act, was only relaxed It was lifted
In
to
19.
accommodate the peace process,
All
to
right.
gradually bring Sinn Féin in, okay, which was the right way to go.
Of course.
But they relaxed this. But the people, the other politicians from the opposing parties that spent all their lives demonizing Sinn Féin and everything, they couldn't hack this. They couldn't understand that. So I got, for example, in a debate in 1994, Desmond O'Malley, who's now deceased, and it was a Fine Gael chap who, John Cushnahan, he was a former Alliance leader in the North. Every time it came to my chance to speak on when the questions were going around in the debate on the top table, these two guys would get up and walk out.
Oh, Jesus.
They didn't want to hear me speak.
Jesus Christ.
And it was just pure, it was the hatred. You could see it, the hatred. And you couldn't really, and they were intelligent men, so you couldn't really say that they were ignorant or that they just didn't understand. It was the hatred.
The hatred.
Oh, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And that's the way it was. And that was of their own making, because they were part of this. This bubble, or what's going on up there in the North has to stay up there, and we don't want the people down here to know about it. Why? Why don't they want the people down here to know about it? It's their country. It's their people.
Exactly, their people.
Yeah. So what they were actually doing is they were prolonging the conflict, because they weren't allowed. Peace could have probably came about 10 years earlier than it did.
Earlier than, of course.
If they were, yeah. And it got to the point as well where I have to say this, and I know a lot of the journalists, NUJ people, the union people, they on the one hand said they were opposed to censorship, but they weren't prepared to do anything about it. And when the time came, and it was a political decision that decided it was going to go, they weren't ready for it.
They weren't ready, no.
They ended up as being part of that system that was keeping this whole thing going. Jesus. Now, I'm going to have to go back a bit in time now,
please, yeah,
because I'm talking about my role, my role as a councillor. But before my role as a councillor, I was a member of the IRA.
That I wanted to ask you. How did you get? Like, where was the point that you said that okay, I'm going into politics?
Okay, we go back now. Remember what I was telling you about in school? I'm learning this, and my mind lives like a sponge. Now, I wasn't very academically good at a lot of subjects, but the one subject I excelled in, and I just loved it, and I'm still doing it today. I'm making a living out of it. History. So I was soaking up, and when I left school, I became, to a large degree, self-educated.
Yeah.
See all the books there.
In fact,
I just read books. I was just all the time. This is before the internet, so it's all books, reading, and I'm reading about all the conflict in every particular angle, and I don't just go, I'm a Republican, I'm going to read that, I'm not going to read that over there. No, I read a whole lot. I want to know what my opponent is thinking. How did he arrive at that point? So I have to read on what he's thinking, his point of view, and the British point of view, and the whole international point of view. So I'm soaking all that information up. And I was in the Irish Army. I joined very young. I actually joined the Irish Army when I was 15.
15? It was possible to join it?
I was forced. I forged my birth cert.
All right. Because
I was in the FCA before that would have been the reserve army. And it was a natural progression because I was full-time with the FCA. I was paid a wage. And then all these guys around me were leaving the FCA to join the regular army. So I was the only one that was underage. So I forged my birth cert. I went up and I signed up with them. Same day, 17th of November, 1975.
Wow.
Okay. And we did all our training together, the whole lot, and then we were all separated. And some were sent to Portlaoise to the guard IRA prisoners who were held in Portlaoise. I didn't want to go there because I just felt that something was very wrong about that. So I was sent to the border, to Monaghan and Cavan, and we regularly go up on patrols. And one particular day, it was an even time because we were in a tent playing cards, all the soldiers. And this particular day, a sergeant came to the tent. He said, you, come on, you're going on patrol. And it was summer's evening. We made the way out, and it was 2 Land Rovers. We were armed, went out. There was a couple of police cars, special branch cars, leading the way. And we were traveling for about 30 to 40 minutes. So I knew we were really deep now into the border, part of the South Armagh. And we could, after a while, we could hear the gunfire in the distance. And as we were getting closer, it was frantic machine gun fire. It was, and I remember thinking, talking to one of the lads, and geez, there's a fierce old battle going on there now, isn't there? And we were heading to this. So we got to this place anyway. We pulled up behind the two police cars, the special branch cars, and the detective was talking to our officer, and the officer came back and gave us instructions, take positions there on the ditch. Now, this ditch was the border.
That was the border.
This was the border.
Wow.
The gunfire is maybe a quarter mile away in the distance. And it was heavy going because you could hear the rattle going on for it. And then within a few minutes, British Army helicopters appeared on the scene. So we knew these guys now are either going to get caught, they're going to get killed, or they're going to come our way. And eventually we could see them running their way. Because they knew if they get arrested on their side, they'll get a lesser sentence, possibly a lesser sentence, or they might get a better time anyway. On the other side, they may not. They may not even make it to the other side.
Exactly.
So they're being chased. We could see the helicopters in pursuit of these guys. They're heading our way. And when they reached about 40 or 50 meters before us, they knew we were there. They dropped their weapons, and then they carried on over towards us, and they were arrested. And what was peculiar about this was we were stunned now. All the guys like me, it wasn't just me, it was all the guys like me. We were stunned because this was, you don't see this every day of the week.
Exactly.
So they had put down their weapons. There's no one going to fire on them, but they were arrested. And I can remember it was 3 of them, and they were dressed in civilian woolly hats, which were probably double as balaclavas, but they woolly hats, denims, and the Doc Marten boots, and the gear of the 1970s. Yeah, so that's what they're. But I remember as they were being put into the police car, one of them looked back, and he just looked at us all. And we were there just with our mouths open. And I remember he stared at me, and it was like, how would you put it? It was like he was looking into my soul.
Wow.
And I just felt, wow. And you know what I thought of immediately? And I was only 16 years of age at this time. I thought of how Judas must have been feeling when he's watching Jesus being taken away by the Romans.
That's true. Yeah.
And so we went back anyway. Now, what I should have said was on the way out in this patrol, banter, joking, all the things that fellas do at that age, and you're having a crack in the back of the Jeep, back of the Land Rover. On the way back, we were escorting these police cars back to their guard station with these 3 prisoners. And it was total silence. Everyone had their heads down. Even the non-commissioned officer, the sergeant, he had his head down. The only person who had a bit of a pep in his step was the officer in the passenger seat with the driver. He thought he was after pulling off a great one. He's probably going to get promotion out of this. But we were just... And no one said a word. So then we went back to our camp, and we were dismounted. The guard was dismounted. We had back our weapons into the guard room. We went back into our tent to resume our game of poker that we were playing before we were taken up patrol. And there was silence. And one man was dealing out the cards, and everyone had their heads down because everyone was thinking, trying to process everything that happened in the last hour or so. And all the heads were down. And then one fella broke the ice. He caught his hand, the cards, and he just threw them on there. And he said, fuck this. I don't ever want to be in a situation like that again. Because he made a point, which I forgot to say. When these guys were coming from the British, being chased by the British, our radio, there was a radio in behind us. We could all hear it. We could hear the English accents saying, "Hey, mate, they're coming your way, mate. You better pick them up now." So we were doing the bidding of the British, and they were telling us what to do.
Yeah.
So I often ask the lads, I said, was that our radio in the Land Rover, or was it one of the Garda radios that we heard?
Exactly.
Because there was definitely collaboration going on there. And I remember we went back. So we were back now having this game of cards. And this guy says, and I said, whoa, thanks be to God, it wasn't just me that's feeling like this. Because
Everybody was feeling the
I
same.
thought I was being the odd one out here, and I thought maybe there's something wrong with me thinking the way I'm thinking. But I was saying this is wrong. This is my country. These guys telling us.
What to do
Yeah.
exactly.
So everyone felt the same way. And one fella said, "Well, fuck this now." He said, "The next time that happens, if we have to fire, I'm not going firing on Irishmen. I'm going firing on those fuckers that are chasing them."
Jesus.
And I said, "Fuck it, that's the way we're all thinking." You know? No, nothing was ever done about that, but I
Of course, this
knew.
is the thinking. Yeah.
Yes. So that was my introduction to the Irish Army on on the border, and it wasn't our border; it was a British imposed border, and we were there upholding that border for
Exactly.
them.
For them.
Yeah, so that's where my thinking is now developing. And then as this tour was going on, this I think it was 4 or 5 months we did the tour for the whole summer of
Mhm.
'76. Similar things were happening. We go into a bar at night,
Mhm.
socialize. We get the shit kicked out of us by the locals.
By the locals.
We
That
go
you were
through,
helping the British Army,
yeah.
yeah?
So then we go through a village or a town on a patrol. We're stoned by the locals. This is now is inside the Irish border. We're stoned. And I remember one day we came up to a junction on a crossroads. The Jeep, we were in the lead Land Rover. And we used to have these small tricolour flags on hanging from the aerial of the Land Rover.
Mhm.
We came to a junction, a T junction, and this old man was standing on the side of the road, and he crossed over in front of the Land Rover. He grabbed the aerial and he ripped down the flag from the aerial, and he said, "Ye don't deserve to be carrying that flag."
Oh,
And I said to the sergeant or corporal, I said, "Are these guys mixing us up for the British Army?" He said, "No, no, they know exactly who we are and what we're doing here. But you have to ignore that. You're not paid to think. You have to do what you're told." Okay? But we used to be talking ourselves among the honorary rank and file. We used to be talking amongst ourselves in our tents and when we're going out. And I wonder, why should we get the shit kicked out of us in the bar? Why should we tolerate that? Yeah. And there was an old man in the pub one day, and he understood it because he had previously, this old man, he had previously been in the Irish Army, and he understood it. He said, "Look, it's not your fault, but you have to accept and understand why these communities," he said, because the British Army have blown up all the smaller roads into the border. So a farmer might have a land here, but he might have 20 acres over that side.
mhm.
And to get over there to 2 or 3 fields away, he has to drive 15 to 20 miles on a different road because the British blew up the. So he said, imagine that going on through the whole border.
Exactly.
So he said, you can understand why these people are angry. And they know that the British can't get away with that unless you're backing them up.
Well,
So we were, and it got to the conclusion. I said this to one of the guys one day. I said, "You know what? We're just another division of the British Army.
they are.
That's what
Yeah.
we're doing."
Yeah.
You know? And I said, I'm not. I said, when I joined the army, I was hoping to, like everyone else, do 21 years, you get your pension, you have a career. You might get even go for promotion if that's the
Mhm.
way you're inclined. That was my plan. But as soon as I came away from the border, I said to myself, I've got just slightly over 2 years to go before my 3 year term is up. And once that's up, I'm gone out of this army.
Wow.
That was my story. Now, I later on, while I was still in the army, I started then collaborating with the IRA.
Mhm.
I'm not going to tell you how, but
Of course,
you
absolutely.
can put two and two together.
Yeah.
Irish Army, IRA. So it's how you do help them.
Of
Okay,
course.
so I did that, and I didn't become I didn't join Sinn Féin. I didn't join the IRA until the hunger strikes.
Hunger
That
strikes.
was the one. That
Okay.
was the one that was the deciding factor for me.
Do you remember the Bobby Sands
I was at
hunger
his
strike?
funeral.
You were at the funeral.
Yeah, I was at a
And
few of their funerals.
probably you remember, obviously, we in younger generation, we know the story and everything, but I would like to understand the feeling that time when he was doing the hunger strike and how was received. And obviously when he deceased, and that was like a big shock for the
Oh, unbelievable. And I remember speaking to people. It was I worked in Irish Steel at construction. There was a construction redevelopment going on in 1980 when the first hunger strike, the one that failed, and then the other one, Bobby Sands, one later. And I remember bringing the campaign. We had a local HVAC committee here in the town, and we brought down. Just people came down, mothers, uh, brothers, sisters of hunger strikers came down to get support for their loved ones in Lancaster. And I remember going around, there was a gang of us, we went around in the canteen in this construction site with a bucket getting money. And I can remember people who were afraid of their lives
Mhm.
to put money in. They didn't want to be seen. So if you were there and you put the money in, then I feel more comfortable putting it in then.
Of
You
course.
know, that sort of way,
Yeah,
because people had this thing, if I'm seen, that everyone's going to think I'm in the IRA, I'm support, and they weren't supporting the IRA. They were just supporting this campaign to get these fellas to stay alive. That's what it was,
exactly.
get
That is
get their
the
rights, that they be treated as human beings, not as scum the way the authorities were treating them at the time. And so, but I saw that then as the hunger strike went on, people who previously wouldn't support it were now,
sporting
yeah.
the
And
cause.
we were thinking at the time, could you imagine if Section 31 of the Broadcasting Act, the censorship that was used for the previous 10 or 12 years, had not been there?
No,
There would have been overwhelming support for these prisoners. In fact, if that censorship wasn't there,
they wasn't
there
there.
may
Yeah,
never been any prisoners.
exactly,
You know, if you look at
exactly,
the bigger picture, because people
exactly.
would have the facts. Could you imagine all that happened today when you have social media? It
Absolutely.
would be a
Yeah, could be, of course,
totally different ballgame.
of
The
course.
British wouldn't have lasted a week. It would
Yeah,
have been all over.
exactly.
Yeah. So
And then you
I
joined
think
to.
I think it was. I remember I was in bed one morning and Bobby Sands was well into his hunger strike. He's gone over the 60 days, well over it. And I remember
60 days.
my sister woke me up to tell me the news. He's just reported the news. He's just died. And I knew there and then. I said, "That's it. No, there's no going back now."
He
And
became martyr. Yeah.
yeah, and that I took the decision to join it.
Ah, that was the moment that
That
you
was it. Yeah,
decided.
yeah,
And how that was received in the South. I know that the North different feelings, but people in South as well, they felt. I mean, when I talk about the South, I mean Republic, the
yeah.
Free
Well, it's
Republic.
interesting because you can see if you the election of 1981, the general election, they put up the candidates. Okay? No, Bobby Sands was elected in the north
Mhm,
to
mhm,
Westminster, but the southern ones came in the summer of that year, and they got a few prisoners elected. But you see that the constituency they got elected near the border constituency,
mhm.
and the reason for that was censorship didn't work. The closer you got to the border, that's Section 31 censorship didn't work because people were more in tune with reality on the ground, what
Reality,
was
yeah,
going
yeah,
on
yeah.
there. Now, the people in the south, they're sheltered, they don't know what's going on. And for a person in Cork, he's hardly going to think about what's going on in Belfast or anything there.
Right.
But the closer you get to the border where the censorship didn't exist on the ground, they got way more
Way
support.
more
Yeah.
sport.
But they still got support down here.
Of course, like
Mairead
the big,
Farrell was stood in Cork North Central and she got a good, decent vote. She didn't get
obviously.
elected, but people who don't know Mairead Farrell, she was one of the martyrs in
Yeah.
what you call it, um,
And the-
the island, Spanish island, Gibraltar.
Gibraltar, yeah.
Gibraltar Tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And can I ask you, Kieran, like, obviously, after joining, I don't want to go into detail for your own benefit, but you served prison time as well.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I,
So,
yeah.
so um, I served a prison term in Belgium for
Mhm.
membership, and there was three of us were.
Why Belgium?
Well, I'm not going to go into the details now,
Yeah,
but I was working in Belgium,
of course.
genuinely working with
Mhm,
and there was a gang from Cobh when
mhm, mhm,
workforce. There was 13 of us. There was a notice because this now was the late 80s, and there's still the depression is still
mhm.
a lot of immigration going on, and most of the work was abroad. So I went into the social welfare office one day, and I saw a notice on the wall. People wanted for a construction company in Belgium, and I think it was 13 of us from Cobh went, and on that occasion. Loads of work, money was good, conditions were good, good place to live and all that. And I spent 7 months working, but then um, I my I was still an IRA member, and my eyes and ears were open and watching and processing what was going on, and I saw a few things which I knew would be very beneficial to struggle back home in Ireland.
Mhm.
So after my 7 months was up, because a lot of people left after the 7 months because you're going into the winter period, I think it was October, I came back and I reported to my commanding officer
Commander, yeah.
what I observed, what I noticed, and all that. And it was taken a bit further, and someone came back to me and said, "Look, there could be something on there. There could be something. But we're going to need to go back and do a bit of more groundwork on that for preparation for that." And that's what I did. And another team was sent out when I had what I had to do, or there's another team sent out, and we were then getting prepared to put that plan into action when we were arrested.
Arrested.
Yeah.
How long you were in the prison?
Now I got a 2-year sentence.
2-year sentence.
There was 3 of us. No, there was the whole team were captured. Only 3 of us were captured. So I got 2 years. The officer in charge, he got 3, and another chap who only arrived in the country the night before, he got 6 months.
Oh.
And by the time our case came up, 6 months was already served, so he was released.
He was released.
And then I served 10 months.
10 months,
on good behavior, and the other chap followed later.
Did you get any, obviously it was Belgium, and it's not like England, but in the prison you get any torture or any bad treatment?
No, quite the opposite.
Quite the opposite.
Quite the opposite. The interesting thing about it was the fascinating thing was the court case itself. Unbelievable. I had no knowledge of what kind of country this was. I knew it was a Catholic country, so
you thought that it could be like
the sympathy that way. But when we went there, you're a three-judge panel. There was no jury, and we thought initially that might have been a bad thing, but it was actually a good thing. And everything was done through Flemish, so we had a barrister, but he was translating for us. So we did get a concession from the court that one of us, our guy who was in charge, the commanding officer, would be given permission to address the court.
Wow.
Okay. So what he did, he availed very cleverly, he availed of an explanation, a brief, concise history of the struggle from 1969 up to why we're here now in your country.
Right.
And he went through it all. And he explained how none of us, 3 guys, one was from Limerick, I was from Cork, the other guy was from Dublin. None of us would have been here in this country if it wasn't from what was happening in the other part of our country. So I'm watching the body, as he's speaking, I'm watching the body language of the 3 judges, and I could see them, they were nodding in approval for everything he was saying. And at one stage it came to the period of the hunger strikes. Okay? And he said that one of the fourth hunger strike, Patsy O'Hara, was a personal friend of his. And he knew him, and he the whole lot. And this is no word of a lie. The guy on the left, I saw him take out a hanky and wipe his eye.
Oh.
And I said,
the judge, yeah?
Yeah. I said to the lads, I said, we're flying here, guys. We're going to do this. And that's the way it turned out. And what amazed me was this experience brought into the light how much we underestimated Section 31 of the Broadcasting Act.
Of course.
Because all the British propaganda that was used around the world at that point to show up this conflict in Ireland as being one between 2 religious tribes. We're the innocent referees, the British. We're the innocent referees in the middle trying to keep these 2 factions apart. He blew that out of the water with his statement, because he showed that these guys, this is a 3-way conflict.
Yeah.
You got Republicans, you got Unionists, and you got the British. But the Unionists and the British are the one, because the British are controlling the Unionists.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you really have only 2 participants.
Either British
the
or
Unionists, the loyalist paramilitaries, they're just surrogates of the British Army.
Exactly.
They do the dirty work that the British are not willing to be caught doing, in case the international community see that.
Everything, yeah.
So the Belgians, they were awake to all of this.
They're not stupid, yeah.
When he was saying this,